I turned the dial on my binoculars, adjusting the focus as I scanned the tree line. The forest stretched out below Tower 7 like a rumpled green blanket, darkening as evening settled in. Nothing concerning caught my eye, no smoke plumes, no unusual movement. Just another quiet summer evening in the Cascades. The radio on my desk crackled to life. Tower 7, this is Tower 12. Radio check, over. The voice was young, eager, and a bit too formal with the protocol. I smiled to myself as I picked up the handset. Tower 12, this is 7. Reading you loud and clear. How's it going up there, Sawyer? All good here, sir. Just completed my evening sweep. No signs of smoke or unusual activity to report. Drop the sir, kid. It's just Russell, I said, leaning back in my chair. And good work on the sweep. First one can be overwhelming with all that territory to cover. Right, sorry, Russell. He laughed, a nervous sound that reminded me how young he was. It is a lot to take in. The view is incredible, though. I stood up and walked to the north-facing windows, looking in the direction of Tower 12, though it was too far to see. Wait till you see it at sunrise. Worth waking up early for. 15 years I'd been doing this job. 15 summers, watching over these mountains, learning every ridge and valley, every weather pattern. I'd seen dozens of rookies come and go. Most lasted a season or two before the isolation got to them. Something told me Sawyer might be different. There was an earnestness in his voice, a genuine curiosity about the forest that reminded me of myself when I started. How long did it take you to get used to being alone up here? Sawyer asked, breaking protocol by not signing off properly. I didn't correct him. I thought about his question as I watched a hawk circle lazily over the trees. Honestly, about 3 seasons. First year, I nearly quit twice. Second year was better. By the third, it felt like home. That's encouraging, I guess. He didn't sound convinced. The trick is to keep your mind busy. Read books, keep a journal, learn to identify every bird call you hear. The forest has a lot to teach if you're willing to listen. What I didn't tell him was about Tower 12's history, about how 3 lookouts had requested transfers in the last decade, about the strange lights sometimes reported near that sector that never turned out to be campers or hikers, about equipment that mysteriously malfunctioned despite being in perfect working order. I especially didn't mention Carl Jennings, who abandoned his post without notice 5 years back. They found his truck at the base of the tower, keys still in the ignition, but never found Carl. Some towers just had bad reputations, I told myself. No need to spook the kid on his first week with ghost stories and rumors. I brought a stack of books and my guitar, Sawyer said, though I'm not sure my neighbors will appreciate my playing. Your nearest neighbor is me, and I'm 8 miles away. Play as loud as you want. We chatted for another 10 minutes. I walked him through some procedures he seemed unsure about, reminded him about the weather log, and warned him about the family of bears that sometimes wandered near Tower 12's access road. Check in tomorrow morning, same time, I said before signing off. Will do. Tower 12, out. I put the handset back and returned to my evening routine. Dinner was a can of beef stew heated on my small propane stove. I ate while updating my log, noting wind direction and cloud coverage. The night settled in around me, the darkness outside making the windows into mirrors that reflected my small living space. The narrow bed, the desk cluttered with maps and field guides, the bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks I'd read multiple times. The next morning, Sawyer checked in right on schedule. His voice sounded tired but enthusiastic as he reported a deer sighting near his tower. They'll get bold if you feed them, I warned. I wasn't planning to, but good to know. Over the next 2 days, our radio conversations became a comfortable routine. I found myself looking forward to them, enjoying the chance to pass on what I'd learned over the years. Sawyer was a quick study, asking smart questions about fire behavior and weather patterns. I explained how to spot the difference between dust clouds and smoke, how certain cloud formations could predict lightning strikes, and the importance of tracking wind direction when a fire was spotted. "You ever had to coordinate a major firefighting operation?" he asked during our second evening check-in. "3 times, I said. Biggest one was in 2015. Lightning strike started it and the wind pushed it toward a campground. Had to evacuate 60 people. Watched the whole thing from up here, guiding the teams on the ground. That must have been intense." It was. I didn't elaborate on the weight of that responsibility, how every decision I made, every coordinate I relayed could mean life or death for the firefighters and campers. He'd learn that burden soon enough if he stayed. By the 3rd day, I could tell Sawyer was settling in. His radio calls were more relaxed, less formal. He'd started exploring the area around his tower, reporting on trail conditions and wildlife sightings. I found myself feeling oddly proud, like I was watching a younger version of myself find his footing. That evening, I sat at my desk, finishing my daily report as the sun began its descent. The sky to the west blazed orange and gold, but to the east, where Tower 12 stood, dark clouds were gathering. I frowned, watching the storm front moving in faster than the forecast had predicted. Those clouds looked heavy with rain, possibly lightning. A strange feeling crept over me as I watched those clouds, an uneasiness I couldn't explain. Tower 12 would get hit first if the storm kept its course. Sawyer should be warned to secure any equipment outside and prepare for potential lightning strikes. I reached for the radio handset, my fingers finding the familiar shape, but as I lifted it from the cradle, something made me pause. My hand hovered there, the handset halfway to my mouth. Something deep in my mind, some instinct I couldn't name, whispered a warning. Don't call, not now, not as darkness falls. I stared at the gathering storm, my hand frozen in place, the unease growing stronger with each passing second. I tensed the moment Sawyer's voice crackled through the radio, interrupting the quiet evening in Tower 7. "Russell, you there? I'm seeing something weird out here." I grabbed the handset, my dinner forgotten on the small folding table. "Go ahead, Sawyer." "There are lights moving through the trees about half a mile northeast of my position." His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "They're not following any trail, just moving between the trees." My mouth went dry. I gripped the radio tighter, memories I'd spent years burying suddenly rushing back. What kind of lights? Flashlights? Lanterns? No. They're different. Red, but not like flashlights. More like glowing orbs. They're moving in patterns that don't make sense. Not like hikers or rangers. They stop, then move sideways, then up, like they're floating. I closed my eyes, the recognition hitting me like a physical blow. The same lights I'd seen years ago. The same lights others had reported before disappearing. "How many do you see?" I kept my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. 3, no, 4 now. They're spreading out around the tower. His breathing had quickened. "Russell, this doesn't feel right. They're moving. Wrong. Listen to me very carefully." I spoke with a calm I didn't feel. "Go inside right now. Lock all the doors and windows. Stay away from the windows and keep the lights low." "You think it's dangerous? Should I just do it, Sawyer? Now. I'm calling the district office." I switched to the emergency channel while reaching for my logbook. Flipping to the back page, I found the after-hours number for Bonnie Doyle. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed her number on the satellite phone. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Russell, it's almost 10. What's happening?" "Bonnie, we have a situation at Tower 12. Sawyer's reporting unusual lights moving through the forest around his position. I need to know if we have any personnel authorized in that area tonight." There was a pause before she answered. "No authorized personnel in that sector. Fire risk is low, no scheduled maintenance. He shouldn't have anyone within 5 miles of his position." That's what I thought. I took a deep breath. I need backup sent to Tower 12 immediately." "What exactly is he seeing that has you so concerned?" Her voice had shifted to her professional, measured tone. The lights matched descriptions from previous incidents in that area. I chose my words carefully. "I believe Sawyer could be in danger." "Previous incidents? You mean Carl Jennings?" "And others before him." I didn't elaborate. "Bonnie, we need to get someone out there." She sighed. "Russell, you know I can't get a team mobilized before morning. The night crews are all committed to the prescribed burn on the West Ridge, and helicopter support is grounded until dawn due to the incoming weather system." The radio crackled with Sawyer's voice, more urgent now. I held up a finger even though Bonnie couldn't see me. "Russell, they're getting closer. I'm inside with everything locked, but..." He paused, his breathing loud through the speaker. "There's something else out there with the lights." "What do you see, Sawyer?" I asked, my stomach knotting. "It's tall, really tall, thin, like impossibly thin." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And its head is just a red light, like the others, but bigger. It's just standing at the tree line, looking up at the tower." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. "Bonnie, did you hear that?" "I heard." Her voice had lost its professional detachment. "Russell, what the hell is going on up there?" "I don't know, but I'm not waiting until morning." I made the decision instantly. "I'm heading to Tower 12 now. That's against protocol. The roads aren't safe at night, especially with the fog rolling in." "Noted." I cut her off. "Log my departure as 22:15 hours. I'll radio when I arrive." I ended the call before she could argue further and grabbed the emergency kit from under my bunk. Flashlight, first aid supplies, flare gun, extra batteries, and my personal addition, a heavy hunting knife. I keyed the radio again. "Sawyer, I'm coming to you. Should be there in about 40 minutes. Keep all doors locked and stay away from the windows. I'm on my way." "It's climbing the tower." His voice had dropped to a terrified whisper. "Russell, it's climbing the outside of the tower. I can hear the metal creaking." "How is it climbing? The stairs are..." The transmission cut to static. Harsh, grating white noise that filled the small room. "Sawyer! Sawyer! Do you copy?" I shouted into the handset, but only static answered me. I grabbed my jacket and keys, taking the stairs 2 at a time as I raced down from Tower 7. My truck sat in its usual spot, and I threw the emergency kit onto the passenger seat before jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life as I flipped on the headlights, illuminating the dirt access road ahead. I spun the truck around and hit the gas, the tires spitting gravel as I accelerated toward the main Forest Service road. "Sawyer, do you copy?" I tried the radio again as I drove, one hand on the wheel, the other clutching the handset. "Tower 12, this is Tower 7. Please respond." Nothing but static. The main road was rough, pitted from spring rains and only partially maintained. My headlights cut through the darkness, catching the reflective eyes of a deer that bounded away into the underbrush. I pushed the truck faster than was safe, feeling the suspension protest as I hit a pothole. "Tower 12, this is Tower 7. Sawyer, if you can hear me, give any response." I tried a different channel, then another. Nothing but the same empty static. The fog Bonnie had mentioned was rolling in, thick banks of it hanging between the trees and spilling across the road. My headlights reflected back at me, making it harder to see. I slowed slightly, knowing I'd be useless to Sawyer if I wrapped my truck around a tree. I tried the radio again. "Sawyer, this is Russell. Please respond." My voice cracked slightly on the last word. Each failed attempt to reach him twisted the knot in my gut tighter. The road narrowed as it wound up toward Tower 12, switchbacks making the journey longer than the actual distance. I knew every turn, having driven this route countless times during daylight hours, but never at night, never in fog this thick, and never with this sense of dread weighing on me. The truck's engine whined as I pushed it up a steep incline, the headlights momentarily pointing skyward before leveling out at the top. I was close now, maybe 10 minutes away if I maintained this speed. Sawyer, I'm almost there. If you can hear me, I'm almost there. I wasn't sure if the transmission was getting through, but I had to try. The final stretch of road was the worst, narrow, with a steep drop-off on one side and barely enough room for the truck. I slowed down, leaning forward over the steering wheel, as if those few inches would help me see better through the fog. When Tower 12's access road finally appeared, I turned sharply, the truck's tires sliding slightly on the damp ground. The beam of my headlight swept across the clearing as I pulled up to the base of the tower. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. The silence was complete. No wind, no animals, none of the normal forest sounds, just a heavy, waiting stillness. I grabbed my flashlight and the emergency kit, stepping out of the truck. The metal stairs leading up to Tower 12 loomed above me, disappearing into darkness. I aimed my light upward, but the fog scattered the beam, making it impossible to see the observation deck. "Sawyer?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. No answer came from the darkened tower above. That silence, the complete absence of response, hit me harder than any scream could have. I stood at the base of the stairs, staring up into the darkness, knowing I had to climb, but terrified of what I might find. The metal stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed toward Tower 12's observation deck. Each step felt heavier than the last, my flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness ahead. "Sawyer!" I called out, my voice echoing against the metal structure. "Sawyer, you up there?" Only silence answered back. I reached the landing and tried the door. Unlocked. It swung open with a low groan, revealing the darkened interior of the observation deck. My flashlight beam swept across the small space, catching dust particles floating in the air. "Sawyer?" I tried again, stepping inside. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots. The observation deck stood empty, but not abandoned. The radio equipment hummed softly, its power lights glowing green in the darkness. Sawyer's logbook lay open on the desk, pen still resting in the crease. I moved closer, angling my flashlight to read his last entry. The handwriting started neat but grew increasingly frantic and slanted toward the bottom of the page. 2215 hours. They're at the tree line now. Red lights, 4 of them, moving like nothing I've ever seen. One has taken form. Tall, too tall, looking up at me. God help me, it's climbing the tower. The final words were pressed so hard into the paper they'd nearly torn through. I turned slowly, examining the rest of the space. Sawyer's jacket hung on the back of his chair. A half-drunk mug of coffee sat on the desk, long gone cold. His backpack leaned against the wall, still packed with his personal items. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place. I moved to the small living quarters attached to the observation deck. The narrow bed was made with military precision, exactly as I'd expect from Sawyer. His guitar stood in the corner, a paperback novel face down on the nightstand. I checked the tiny bathroom, toothbrush in its holder, towel hung neatly on the rack. No signs of struggle anywhere, no forced entry, nothing broken or overturned. It was as if he'd simply stepped outside and vanished. I returned to the main deck, rubbing my face with my hands. This made no sense. Where could he have gone? And what were those lights he'd described? A burst of static from the radio made me jump. I rushed over, grabbing the handset. "Sawyer, Sawyer, is that you? Come in." The static continued, then cleared slightly. A voice emerged, distorted, distant, but unmistakably Sawyer's. "Not what we thought." His words faded in and out. "Forest has places hidden inside it, places that shouldn't exist." I frantically adjusted the dials, trying to strengthen the signal. "Sawyer, where are you? Can you hear me?" He continued as if he couldn't hear me at all. "Others here too. The ones who were taken before." The transmission warped, stretching his words into unnatural lengths before snapping back to clarity. "Carl is here. He says he's been here for years, but it feels like days." Carl Jennings. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. The lookout who vanished 5 years ago. "Sawyer, this is Russell. Can you hear me? Give me your location," I shouted into the handset, desperately turning dials. "The lights are doorways, Russell." My name and his voice sent chills down my spine. "They open when it wants them to. Don't follow them. Don't." The transmission dissolved into a high-pitched whine that made me wince, then nothing but dead air. I tried every channel, every frequency, called his name until my voice grew hoarse. Nothing came back but empty static. I grabbed my flashlight and emergency kit and headed back outside. The night air hit me like a wall of ice. I stood on the observation deck's exterior platform, shining my light into the surrounding forest. "Sawyer!" I bellowed, my voice carrying through the trees. No response. I descended the tower stairs and began searching the perimeter. The beam of my flashlight caught nothing but trees, underbrush, and occasional startled wildlife. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed through here. For hours, I combed the surrounding area in expanding circles, calling Sawyer's name until my throat burned. The forest remained silent and unyielding, revealing nothing of what had happened to the young lookout. As the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, I returned to Tower 12, exhausted and no closer to finding Sawyer than when I'd arrived. I sat heavily in his chair, staring at the radio that had carried his impossible message. I knew what I had to do next. With leaden fingers, I reached for the satellite phone and dialed the emergency line to the district office. "This is Lookout Murphy at Tower 7, I said when the dispatcher answered. "I need to report a missing person. Lookout Wilkins from Tower 12. I arrived on site after radio contact was lost and found the tower empty. No sign of him in the immediate area." "Any signs of animal attack or injury?" the dispatcher asked. "Negative. All his belongings are still here. No blood or signs of struggle." "Could he have gone hiking and gotten lost?" "Negative. It was full dark when contact was lost. He wouldn't leave the tower at night." "Understood. We'll dispatch search teams immediately. What was the nature of his last communication?" I paused, my mind replaying Sawyer's description of the tall entity climbing his tower, the red lights moving unnaturally through the trees, his radio transmission about hidden places and doorways. "Lookout Murphy? What did Wilkins report in his last communication?" "He reported unusual lights in the forest," I said carefully. "Possibly hikers off trail." Then the transmission cut out. I couldn't tell them the rest. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I'd done something to Sawyer and was making up stories to cover my tracks. Either way, it would end my career and any chance I had of finding out what really happened. "Roger that. Search teams are being mobilized now. ETA approximately 1 hour. Please remain on site." "Understood." I hung up and walked to the window. The sky had lightened to a pale gray, revealing the endless green canopy stretching in all directions. Somewhere out there was an answer to what happened to Sawyer. But I already knew the search teams wouldn't find it. Whatever took him wasn't something they were equipped to look for. I watched the sunrise paint the treetops gold, feeling utterly helpless as I waited for the search teams to arrive. They'd come with their dogs and their equipment and their protocols. They'd search every inch of the accessible forest. They'd interview me multiple times, checking for inconsistencies. They'd develop theories. Animal attack, accidental fall, deliberate wandering off. But they wouldn't find Sawyer. Just like they never found Carl Jennings, or any of the others who'd vanished from Tower 12 over the years. The sound of approaching helicopters reached my ears. The search was beginning, but I already knew how it would end. The helicopter blades pounded overhead as I stood on Tower 12's observation deck, watching the search teams fan out into the forest below. 3 men in Forest Service uniforms approached the tower, their faces grim and professional. I recognized the lead investigator, Dale Winters from Regional, by his squared shoulders and the notepad already in his hand. "Mr. Murphy, we need to talk about what happened here." His voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered bad news many times before. I nodded and led them inside, where Sawyer's half-drunk coffee still sat on the desk. The tallest investigator picked up the logbook, flipping through the pages until he reached the final entry. I'd read it so many times I could recite it from memory. "Walk us through the timeline," Winters said, pulling out a chair. "Start with your last confirmed contact with Lookout Wilkins." I kept my account simple and factual. Sawyer had reported seeing lights in the forest, probably hikers off trail, communication cut out during our call. I'd tried repeatedly to re-establish contact before deciding to drive over, concerned about his safety. When I arrived, the tower was empty, with no signs of struggle. "And you heard nothing else on the radio after the initial report about lights?" Winters asked, pen hovering over his notepad. I hesitated, thinking of Sawyer's distorted voice, talking about doorways and Carl Jennings, about places in the forest that shouldn't exist. "Just static," I said. "I tried all channels." The questioning lasted hours. They wanted to know about Sawyer's mental state in previous days, whether he'd mentioned personal problems, if he seemed unstable. I answered truthfully that he'd been enthusiastic and professional, adapting well to the isolation. They asked about his hiking experience, whether he might have left the tower to investigate the lights himself. "He knew protocol," I said. "Lookouts don't leave their posts at night unless there's immediate danger." "But you did," the third investigator pointed out. "You left your post to come here." That was different. He wasn't responding. Winters leaned forward. "Did Wilkins ever mention feeling watched? Any paranoia about being in Tower 12? The question caught me off guard. "No. Why?" "Just following all avenues of investigation," he said, but his eyes lingered on mine a beat too long. "They photographed everything, the open logbook, the cold coffee, Sawyer's jacket still draped over the chair. The search continued for 3 more days before they scaled it back to periodic sweeps. I returned to Tower 7 with Sawyer's guitar case in my truck. Nobody had asked for it, and I couldn't bear to leave it behind. Sleep became impossible. Each night I lay awake, radio by my pillow, scanning channels for any trace of Sawyer's voice. Sometimes I thought I heard something, whispers beneath the static, but it never formed into words. During the day, I performed my duties mechanically, scanning the horizon for smoke, logging weather patterns, reporting in on schedule. My weekly check-in calls with other lookouts grew awkward. They'd ask how I was doing with forced casualness, carefully avoiding any mention of Sawyer or Tower 12. The silence around his name grew heavier each day. 2 weeks after the disappearance, I drove into town for supplies. The small general store that served as the main outpost for Forest Service personnel was half empty when I entered. Mrs. Abernathy, who'd run the place for 30 years, gave me a sympathetic smile as I filled my basket with canned goods and batteries. "Holding up okay, Russell?" she asked as she rang up my purchases. "Fine," I said, not meeting her eyes. As she bagged my groceries, 2 hikers entered, talking loudly about trail conditions. I recognized them as seasonal workers who helped maintain the forest access roads. "Told them I wouldn't take that assignment," one was saying, "not anywhere near the vanishing post." "Tower 12?" his companion asked. "Come on, that's just stories." 6 lookouts gone in 50 years? That's not stories, that's statistics. I froze, my hand halfway to my wallet. 6 lookouts? I only knew about Carl Jennings and now Sawyer. Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat loudly and the men noticed me. Their conversation died instantly. "That'll be $47.12, she said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. I paid and gathered my bags, nodding to the hikers as I passed. Their eyes followed me to the door. Back in my truck, I sat with the engine off, thinking about what I'd heard. 6 lookouts, the vanishing post. These weren't new nicknames. They'd spoken with the familiarity of common knowledge, which meant the administration knew. They had to know. That night, I made a decision. The next morning, instead of driving back to Tower 7, I headed to the district headquarters in Oak Ridge. The administrative building was a single-story structure of wood and stone, designed to blend with the forest aesthetic while housing the nerve center of our operations. I'd called ahead with a request to access personnel records for a training manual I claimed to be developing. Bonnie had approved it without question, probably relieved I was focusing on something other than Sawyer's disappearance. The records clerk led me to a small room lined with filing cabinets. Personnel files are in the back cabinets. Let me know if you need anything else. Once alone, I moved quickly to the section labeled Incident Reports, Historical. The folders were organized by decade, going back to the 1950s when the lookout system was first established in our region. I pulled the files for Tower 12 and spread them across the table. What I found turned my stomach. The first incident was from 1972, a lookout named James Harmon who'd vanished during his 3rd season. The official report cited abandonment of post with a note that his vehicle was found at the tower base. In 1986, Teresa Miller disappeared during a night shift. Her logbook's final entry mentioned lights moving through the trees. 1994. David Chen, missing after radio contact, was lost during a storm. 2001. Alicia Ramos, vanished without a trace. And then Carl Jennings in 2018. 5 lookouts before Sawyer, all from Tower 12, all officially listed as missing persons, presumed voluntary departure, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Each case had been quietly buried under administrative paperwork. Transfers of replacement personnel, equipment inventories, budget reallocations. I dug deeper, pulling files from related incidents around Tower 12. Most contained routine reports of equipment malfunctions or maintenance requests, but one thin folder from 1967 caught my attention. It was labeled simply, Incident Report, Sullivan. Inside was a handwritten statement from Michael Sullivan, a lookout who'd been stationed at Tower 12 for just 3 weeks. His account described hearing strange noises outside his tower one night, followed by equipment failures. When he looked outside, he reported seeing a tall entity with a red light where its head should be, standing at the tree line, looking up at him. Sullivan barricaded himself inside the tower until morning. He requested immediate transfer the next day and was reassigned to a different district. The report was signed by the district supervisor with a single notation. Lookout exhibited signs of isolation-induced hallucination. Recommend psychological evaluation and reassignment. I sat back, my hands shaking. Sullivan had seen it. The same thing Sawyer described in his final logbook entry. The same thing that had taken him and Carl and all the others. The door opened, startling me. Supervisor Wells stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the files spread across the table. Russell, I thought you were working on a training manual. I didn't bother hiding the files. 6 lookouts, John. 6 lookouts from the same tower, and nobody thought to mention it. He closed the door behind him and took the seat across from me. What exactly are you suggesting? You know what's happening out there. You've known for years. Wells sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 55 years. What I know is that isolated posts in remote wilderness sometimes attract people who can't handle the psychological pressure. People break, Russell. They walk away from jobs, from lives. It happens. And they all leave their vehicles, their personal belongings. Their last entries in logbooks all mention strange lights. Patterns exist in everything if you're looking for them. He gathered the files, stacking them neatly. This isn't helpful to anyone, least of all to you. Sullivan saw something in 1967, the same thing Sawyer reported before he vanished. Wells paused, his hand resting on the Sullivan file. Michael Sullivan had been awake for 36 hours straight during fire season. He was exhausted and frightened by normal forest sounds. We've all been there. I need to see Tower 12's complete records. That won't be possible. He collected the remaining files. The administration has made a decision. Tower 12 will be permanently closed, effective immediately. The area will be monitored by satellite and aerial surveys going forward. The finality in his voice hit me like a physical blow. You're just going to pretend none of this happened? That Sawyer just walked away? The official investigation concluded with no evidence of foul play. Sawyer Wilkins has been classified as a missing person. The case remains open with local authorities. His voice softened slightly. Russell, you're one of our best. Don't throw away 15 years of service chasing ghosts. Let sleeping dogs lie. He stood, files tucked under his arm. I need your word that this ends here. No more digging, no more questions. Focus on your duties at Tower 7. I said nothing, and he took my silence as agreement. At the door, he paused. I'm sorry about Sawyer, truly, but there's nothing to be found in these old files except more pain. He tapped the stack of folders. Some mysteries don't have answers we can live with. After he left, I sat alone in the empty room, the weight of what I'd discovered pressing down on me. Tower 12 would be closed, the records buried deeper, and Sawyer would become just another name on a list that nobody talked about. Another victim of the vanishing post. I thought about Sullivan's report and the entity he described. I thought about Sawyer's voice on the radio, talking about doorways and hidden places, about Carl Jennings being somewhere that felt like days when years had passed. Wells wanted me to let sleeping dogs lie, but some things once woken don't go back to sleep, and some duties don't end just because someone tells you to stop looking. 3 months had passed since Sawyer vanished from Tower 12, and I couldn't let it go. The official investigation had ended weeks ago with the same conclusion as all the others. Missing person, case open but inactive. But I knew better. I sat at my desk in Tower 7, staring at the map I'd been working on instead of completing my afternoon weather readings. Red pins marked spots where I'd experienced strange phenomena during my off-duty explorations near Tower 12. Compass spinning wildly, radio picking up fragments of voices, watch stopping for minutes at a time before suddenly catching up. Blue pins showed locations of unusual findings. A circle of trees bent at impossible angles, rocks stacked in formations no hiker would create, patches of ground where nothing would grow surrounded by lush vegetation. The pattern meant something. It had to. I looked up at the wall where I'd hung Sawyer's guitar. I hadn't played it. That felt wrong somehow, but keeping it close seemed important. A reminder of why I was doing this. My radio crackled with the scheduled check-in from Tower 3. 7, this is 3. All clear in my sector. Over. I grabbed the handset. 3, this is 7. Copy that. All clear here too. Over. How's it going over there, Russell? You sound tired. I rubbed my eyes. Just busy with paperwork, nothing exciting. Well, don't work too hard. 3 out. I put the handset down and turned back to my map. I needed to head out again tomorrow. There was a section northeast of Tower 12 I hadn't fully explored yet, and something kept pulling me back there. The next morning, I packed my backpack with more care than usual. Extra batteries, 2 compasses, a backup flashlight, water, protein bars, first aid kit, my regular Forest Service radio, plus the older model I'd started bringing to see if it picked up different frequencies. I slipped my notebook and pencils into the side pocket, then added my camera as an afterthought. I drove the now familiar route to the access road near Tower 12. The tower itself stood empty, its windows reflecting the morning sun like blank eyes. The Forest Service hadn't assigned anyone new there, wouldn't ever, according to Wells. I parked my truck at the same spot I always did, about a mile from the tower, and started hiking toward my planned search area. The forest felt different here than it did around Tower 7. The trees grew closer together, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into strange, shifting patterns on the ground. Birds called overhead, but their songs seemed off somehow, notes held too long or cut short in ways that made the hair on my neck stand up. I pulled out my compass and checked my bearing. Northeast, deeper into the section I'd marked on my map with a question mark. I'd been avoiding it if I was honest with myself. Something about it felt wrong. But I needed answers more than I needed comfort. The first hour passed uneventfully. I took photos of anything unusual, a tree with bark peeling in perfect spirals, a patch of mushrooms growing in an exact circle, and marked my path on my map. Normal research work, the kind I could explain away if anyone asked what I was doing out here. Around noon, I stopped to eat a protein bar and check my position. The compass needle swung lazily, unable to settle on a direction. I tapped it against my palm, but it kept spinning. Not unusual in these woods anymore. I'd learned to navigate by landmarks instead. I put the compass away and took a long drink of water. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint I might have imagined it. Russell. I froze, water bottle halfway to my mouth. Hello? I called out, turning slowly in place. Nothing but trees and undergrowth surrounded me. Russell. This way. The voice sounded like Sawyer's, but with something wrong about it, like hearing someone talk underwater. It came from somewhere ahead of me, deeper into the woods. Sawyer? I took a few steps forward, scanning between the trees. Is that you? No answer came, but I felt a pull to continue in that direction. I marked my position on the map and pressed on, moving more carefully now, stopping often to listen. The forest grew denser as I walked. The trees here were old, their trunks wider than any I'd seen in this part of the woods before. The undergrowth thinned out, replaced by a carpet of moss that seemed to swallow the sound of my footsteps. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky above the canopy remained clear blue. My watch read 1:15 when I stepped into a clearing I hadn't seen on any Forest Service map. The space was perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, ringed by trees that all leaned outward at the same angle, as if pushed by some force from the center. But it was what grew inside the clearing that stopped me cold. The plants formed patterns, not the random scatter of natural growth, but deliberate designs, spirals and whorls of ferns, flowers arranged in geometric shapes, vines growing in perfect right angles. In the center, a patch of white flowers formed what looked like a handprint pressed into the earth. I pulled out my camera with shaking hands and took several photos, then sketched the clearing in my notebook, trying to capture the unnatural precision of the growth patterns. This wasn't possible. Plants didn't grow this way naturally. Someone, or something, had created this. As I knelt to examine one of the geometric flower formations, my radio burst to life with a blast of static that made me jump. Through the noise, I heard fragments of a voice. Found it yet? Static. They don't want more static. Time works differently. It sounded like Sawyer again, but the transmission cut out as quickly as it had started. I tried all channels on both radios, but received only normal silence in return. I checked my watch to note the time of the transmission. The face read 1:15, the same time it had shown when I entered the clearing. I tapped it, held it to my ear. It was still ticking, but the hands hadn't moved. According to my phone, nearly 45 minutes had passed since I'd entered the clearing. Lost time. Another pin for my map. I finished documenting the site and reluctantly left the clearing, marking a clear trail so I could find my way back. The forest seemed to close in behind me as I walked, branches shifting to erase my path. I kept checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The sun was lower than it should have been when I emerged from the densest part of the woods. I'd lost more time somewhere, though I couldn't pinpoint when. My watch was working again, showing 4:30 when my phone read 5:20. I needed to start heading back to my truck. That's when I saw it. A hiking boot lying on its side next to a fallen log about 20 feet off the trail. My heart pounded as I approached it. The boot was a Timberland, size 10, Forest Service issue, exactly like the one Sawyer had been wearing the night he disappeared. I picked it up carefully. The leather was unmarked, the sole barely worn. No scuffs, no mud, no signs of exposure to 3 months of weather. It looked like it had been placed there moments ago. "Sawyer?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely among the trees. "Are you here?" No answer came except the sudden silence of the forest. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through leaves. I put the boot back exactly as I'd found it, took photos from multiple angles, and marked the location precisely on my map. I'd come back tomorrow with better equipment to document this. The hike back to my truck felt longer than it should have. Twice I had to correct my course when I found myself heading in the wrong direction, despite following what I thought was a straight path. The forest had grown dark by the time I reached my vehicle, though my watch insisted it was only 6:30. I drove back to Tower 7 in a daze, my mind racing. The boot was the first physical evidence I'd found. If I could document it properly, maybe I could force the investigation to reopen. That night, I barely slept. I sat at my desk updating my map, adding the clearing and the boot location, connecting pins with red string, looking for patterns that might make sense of what was happening. Around 3 in the morning, I finally collapsed into bed, dreaming of Sawyer's voice calling from deep within a forest that shifted and changed with every step I took. I woke at dawn, grabbed my gear, and headed straight back to Tower 12. I needed to document the boot before anyone else found it, or before it disappeared. I parked in the same spot and hiked directly to the location I'd marked, moving as quickly as I could through the morning mist, but when I reached the fallen log, the boot was gone. I searched the entire area, looking under leaves, behind trees, in hollow logs. Nothing. No boot, no footprints except my own from yesterday. No sign anyone had been there at all. I took photos of the empty spot anyway, my hands shaking with frustration. I'd seen it. I knew I had. It had been right here. Over the next 2 weeks, my explorations grew more frequent and less careful. I stopped filing complete reports at Tower 7, doing only the minimum required to avoid immediate disciplinary action. I skipped meals, lost weight, slept only a few hours at night. The maps on my walls grew more complex, covered in notes and questions and theories. During one overnight stay in my truck near Tower 12, I woke to find all my camera memory cards wiped clean. Hours of documentation gone. Another time, I returned to Tower 7 to find my desk drawers open and papers rearranged, though nothing was missing and all doors had remained locked. I began to feel watched even at Tower 7. I installed extra locks on the doors and started keeping the blinds drawn at all times. The scheduled radio check-ins with other lookouts became ordeals. I could hear the concern in their voices, the careful way they asked if everything was okay. I gave them short, professional responses and ended the conversations as quickly as possible. Bonnie called twice to ask about my missed reports. I told her I'd been sick, promised to catch up on the paperwork. She didn't sound convinced, but she didn't press the issue either. Yesterday, I'd received a formal warning about neglect of duties. I barely registered it. What did paperwork matter when people were vanishing into thin air? When the forest itself seemed to be hiding something? Tonight, I sat on Tower 7's observation deck, binoculars in hand, scanning the darkening forest toward Tower 12. The sunset painted the trees in shades of orange and gold, but as darkness crept in from the east, I kept my focus on the area where I'd found the boot, where the clearing with the impossible plants lay hidden. Something moved between distant trees, a flash of red light about a foot off the ground. I adjusted the binoculars, my hands suddenly steady for the first time in weeks. The light moved again, floating sideways in a way no flashlight or headlamp could. It paused, then continued deeper into the forest, in the direction of the clearing. I lowered the binoculars, my heart pounding. This was it. The same kind of light Sawyer had reported seeing before he disappeared. The same light that had been seen by others who vanished from Tower 12 over the decades. I should call it in. I should lock myself in Tower 7 and wait until morning. I should follow protocol. Instead, I grabbed my backpack, already packed with supplies, and headed for my truck. The light was moving slowly enough that I might be able to catch up if I hurried. It was leading me somewhere, I was sure of it. Maybe to Sawyer. Maybe to answers. As I drove toward Tower 12 one more time, I knew I was making the same choice Sawyer had made, following the light instead of staying safe. But I couldn't turn back. Not when I was this close to understanding what had happened to him, to Carl, to all of them. I parked my truck and stepped into the darkening forest, flashlight in hand. Ahead, through the trees, the red light bobbed and weaved, pausing as if waiting for me to follow. And against every instinct for self-preservation, I did. I followed the red light deeper into the woods, keeping my flashlight trained on the bobbing glow that floated about a foot off the ground. It moved with purpose, stopping occasionally as if to make sure I was still behind it, then continuing its unnatural sideways drift between trees. The light looked exactly like what Sawyer had described in his final transmission. Part of me knew I was making the same mistake he had, but I couldn't turn back now. Not when I was this close to answers. "Sawyer?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the dense forest around me. Nothing but silence answered. The red light paused again, hovering between two massive pines before resuming its path. As I walked, I realized nothing around me looked familiar anymore. I'd patrolled these forests for 15 years, mapped every trail, ridge, and clearing within my sector. But these trees, these weren't right. They grew too close together, their trunks twisted in ways I'd never seen before. The underbrush had become thick and tangled, forcing me to push through vegetation that shouldn't exist in this ecosystem. My boot caught on something, and I stumbled, catching myself against a tree trunk that felt wrong under my palm. Too smooth, almost waxy. "What the hell?" I muttered, pulling my hand away. The beam of my flashlight began to flicker, the steady light pulsing erratically. I smacked it against my palm a few times, but the flickering only worsened. My radio crackled to life on my belt, startling me. Through bursts of static, I heard a voice, Sawyer's voice. "Careful, not what? Seems..." I grabbed the radio. "Sawyer? Sawyer? Can you hear me?" More static then. "Following you. Trap." The red light ahead seemed to pulse brighter, as if responding to the radio. It moved faster now, and I quickened my pace to keep it in sight. The normal sounds of the forest had changed too. An owl called from somewhere to my left, but the sound was stretched and distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I heard rustling in the underbrush that didn't match any animal movement I recognized. My watch read 9:30, but the darkness felt deeper than it should for this time of year. The trees blocked out any moonlight that might have helped guide my way. The red light led me through a winding path that doubled back on itself several times. My sense of direction, usually reliable, had completely failed me. North could have been in any direction. After what felt like hours of walking, the trees suddenly opened into a small clearing. The red light hovered at the far side, illuminating what looked like a dark opening in the rock face, a cave entrance I'd never seen on any Forest Service map. My flashlight flickered one last time, then died completely. I shook it, checked the batteries, but nothing helped. The only light now came from the hovering red glow. As I approached the cave entrance, the radio burst to life again. "Russell!" Sawyer's voice came through clearer now. "Help us!" But it wasn't just Sawyer's voice anymore. Other voices layered beneath his, some whispering, some calling out names I didn't recognize, all coming from inside the cave. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding. Everything about this screamed danger. My training, my instincts, 15 years of Forest Service experience, all told me to turn around, get back to my truck, call for backup. But I heard Sawyer's voice again, desperate and clear. "Please, help! Trapped!" I took out my phone, hoping to use it as a light, but the screen showed no signal and the battery had drained to 5% despite being fully charged when I'd left Tower 7. "Sawyer," I called into the cave. "I'm coming in. Keep talking so I can find you." The red light drifted into the cave entrance, as if inviting me to follow. With no functioning flashlight and my phone nearly dead, I had little choice but to follow the only light source available. I stepped into the cave, immediately feeling the temperature drop several degrees. The walls were smooth, almost polished in places, not the rough stone you'd expect from a natural formation. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing me to turn sideways in spots to squeeze through. The red light remained just ahead, leading me deeper. "This isn't right," I muttered to myself, running my hand along the impossibly smooth wall. "This can't be natural." My radio continued to emit bursts of fragmented voices. "Time different here. Years feel like can't find the way." I recognized one as Carl Jennings, the lookout who disappeared 5 years ago. Another sounded like Teresa Miller from the 1986 report. The cave descended at a steep angle, and I had to brace myself against both walls to keep from sliding down too quickly. The path twisted and turned, disorienting me further. Suddenly, the floor seemed to shift beneath me. I stumbled, grabbing at the wall for support, but my hand passed through what looked like solid rock. I fell forward, expecting to hit the ground, but instead felt like I was falling sideways. My stomach lurched as gravity seemed to reorient itself. Up became down, then sideways, then up again. I closed my eyes, fighting waves of nausea. When I opened them, I found myself crawling on what had been the wall a moment before. The passage had widened, but nothing made physical sense anymore. Water dripped upward from puddles on the floor. Stalactites grew horizontally from one wall. The red light still floated ahead, now joined by several others, all pulsing in unison. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice sounding flat and dead in the strange acoustics. The narrow passage suddenly opened into a vast chamber that shouldn't have been possible. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above me, the walls curving in a perfect circle. Multiple red lights floated throughout the space, casting eerie shadows. In the center of the chamber stood what I can only describe as a figure, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Where its head should have been, a red light pulsed, brighter than the others. Around this entity, translucent human figures stood or knelt or floated. Some moved their mouths as if speaking, though I heard nothing. Others remained perfectly still, their expressions frozen in terror. And there, closest to the entity, was Sawyer. His form was more solid than the others, his Forest Service uniform still clearly visible. His eyes widened when he saw me, recognition and horror crossing his face. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then more urgently, forming the words with exaggerated clarity. A single word: run. The tall entity's red light pulsed brighter. It began to turn, limbs moving in a fluid motion that no human body could achieve. It started gliding toward me, covering ground with unnatural speed. I turned and scrambled back toward the passage, heart hammering in my chest, Sawyer's warning echoing in my mind. Run. I woke up on the ground outside Tower 7, staring at the metal stairs leading up to the observation deck. My head pounded like someone had taken a hammer to it, and I couldn't remember how I got there. Last thing I knew, I was in that impossible cave, running from that thing, with its red light where a head should be. My body felt heavy, like I'd been drugged. Patches of dirt and forest debris clung to my uniform. I pushed myself up to sitting position, wincing at the soreness in my muscles. My backpack lay nearby. Contents spilled across the dirt. Flashlight with dead batteries, empty water bottle, unused protein bars. I fumbled for my watch, squinting at the face through bleary eyes. 3 days. 3 entire days had passed since I'd followed that red light into the woods. Jesus, I whispered, my voice cracking from dehydration. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. I grabbed it from where it had fallen a few feet away. Tower 7, this is District Office. Russell, do you copy? This is attempt 19 to establish contact. Please respond immediately. 19 attempts. They were looking for me. I pressed the talk button with a shaking finger. This is, Tower 7. Russell here. Russell! The voice belonged to Bonnie Doyle. Relief and anger battled in her tone. Where the hell have you been? We've had 3 search teams combing your sector for the past 2 days. I stared at the tree line, trying to piece together how I'd escaped that cave and traveled miles back to Tower 7 without any memory of the journey. My boots were caked with dried mud, my pants torn at the knees. Whatever path I'd taken hadn't been gentle. I got lost, I said, the lie forming automatically. Went out for routine patrol and got turned around in the northeastern sector. For 3 days? Bonnie's disbelief came through clearly. With no radio contact? Radio malfunctioned, I said, looking at the perfectly functional device in my hand. Battery issues. I've been trying to find my way back. The silence stretched long enough that I knew she didn't believe me. Tower 7 access road isn't exactly hidden, Russell, and you know this forest better than anyone. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying slightly. I know how it sounds. I got disoriented. Happens to the best of us. You're not the best of us, Russell. You're supposed to be better than that. Her sigh crackled through the radio. Report to district office tomorrow morning. We need a formal statement for the incident report. Copy that, I said. And Russell, I'm calling off the search teams. Don't make me regret it. The radio went silent. I gathered my scattered gear with trembling hands, trying to make sense of the impossible. How had I escaped? Why couldn't I remember? The entity's red light still burned in my memory, along with Sawyer's silent warning to run. I climbed the stairs to Tower 7 slowly, each step requiring concentration. Inside, everything looked untouched. My maps with red pins and blue pins, the weather log I'd neglected, Sawyer's guitar hanging on the wall. Yet it all felt wrong somehow, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. I locked the door behind me, then checked it twice to make sure. The next morning, I drove to district office and recited my prepared story to Bonnie and 2 rangers who'd led the search teams. I claimed I'd gotten turned around after dark, twisted my ankle, and spent the time slowly making my way back while conserving radio battery. The story had enough plausible elements that they couldn't outright dismiss it, but the skepticism in their eyes was unmistakable. Your truck was found parked near Tower 12, one ranger pointed out. That's a significant deviation from your assigned patrol area. I shrugged. I've been checking the areas around there since Sawyer disappeared. Thought I might find something the search teams missed. Without authorization, Bonnie added. I didn't think I needed permission to be thorough, I countered. Bonnie studied me for a long moment. You look like hell, Russell. I hadn't shaved in days, and the bathroom mirror that morning had shown dark circles under my eyes. Been a rough few days. Take the rest of the week off, she said finally. Get some rest. We'll discuss your unauthorized patrols when you return. I nodded. relieved to escape without formal discipline. As I turned to leave, Bonnie called after me. "Russell, whatever's going on with you, fix it. We can't afford to lose another lookout." If she only knew. The nightmares started that first night back. I dreamed of Sawyer trapped in that circular chamber surrounded by translucent figures. In the dream, he could speak, his voice desperate. "It feeds on us, Russell. Not our bodies. Our minds, our memories. The longer we're here, the less of us remains." I tried to reach for him, but my hand passed through his increasingly transparent form. "The lights are how it hunts," Sawyer continued. "They're doorways. It can't leave this place, so it brings people to it." Behind him, the tall entity moved with that fluid, wrong motion, its red light pulsing. Other voices joined Sawyer's, overlapping in a chorus of desperation. "Decades feel like days here. It remembers you, Russell. We can't find the way out." I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. The darkness of my tower felt suffocating. I fumbled for the lamp and sat up, heart racing. The dream had felt more like communication than nightmare. Over the next week, I added 3 new locks to my door. I installed blackout curtains over every window. I refused to step outside after sunset, no matter what sounds I heard in the forest. During daylight hours, I performed my duties mechanically, scanning for smoke, logging weather patterns, making scheduled radio checks. But my attention remained fixed on the radio. Because now I could hear them. Not all the time, and not clearly, but in the static between channels, in the white noise during quiet hours, voices calling across some barrier between worlds. Sawyer's most frequently, but others too. Names I recognized from the incident reports: Teresa Miller, Carl Jennings, Alicia Ramos. I started recording the transmissions, first on paper, and then with a small tape recorder I drove into town to buy. I created a journal, noting times, frequencies, and content of each message. Some were fragmented pleas for help, others contained information, descriptions of the entity, its behavior, its limitations. "It can't create the doorways just anywhere," Carl's voice explained during one late-night transmission. "Only at certain points where the barriers are thin." "Time moves differently here," Teresa added in another message. "We don't age, we don't hunger, we just exist until we don't anymore." 2 weeks after my return, I sat at my desk, surrounded by pages of transcribed messages and maps marked with new pins. Sleep had become a luxury I could barely afford, my body running on coffee and fear. The pattern had become clear. The transmissions weren't random. They contained coordinates, directions, references to specific forest locations. I plotted each one on my map, connecting them with red string. The resulting pattern formed a web across the forest, with multiple points of concentration, places where the barriers were thin. Doorways. That night, Sawyer's voice came through clearer than ever before. "Russell, it knows about you now. It's angry you escaped." I pressed the recorder closer to the radio. "How did I escape, Sawyer? I don't remember." Static hissed for several seconds before his reply came. "We helped you, all of us. Pushed you through before it could take you completely. But it cost us." "What do you mean, cost you?" "We're fading faster now. It's punishing us." His voice grew fainter. "It's changing strategy, Russell. The lights aren't enough anymore." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "It's using us as bait. Our voices, our memories. It makes us call to people we knew. Makes us give directions, coordinates." I stared at my map with its web of red string and pins, each marking a location from the transmissions. Each a potential trap. "Russell," Sawyer's voice became urgent. "Don't trust anything you hear from us. Not coordinates, not directions, nothing. It's making us lead people to the doorways." The radio erupted in static, then fell silent. I sat frozen, staring at the pages of carefully recorded messages and coordinates, Everything I'd documented, every location I'd marked, they weren't escape routes or safe zones. They were traps. The entity wasn't just capturing humans who stumbled across its doorways. It was using those it had already taken to lure more victims into its reach, using their voices, their relationships, their trust. I looked at my wall of maps, at the web of red string connecting dozens of locations throughout the forest. Not a pattern of the entity's movements as I'd thought, but a network of hunting grounds. And I'd been methodically documenting them, preparing to investigate each one. The terrible truth settled over me like a physical weight. I wasn't tracking the entity. I was doing exactly what it wanted, following breadcrumbs that would lead me back into its trap. And worse, if I'd shared these coordinates with others, I would have delivered more victims straight to it. I stood up on shaking legs and approached the map wall. With trembling hands, I began to tear it down, ripping away string and pins, crumpling pages of coordinates. I couldn't destroy the knowledge completely. That might be needed someday. But I had to recognize it for what it was, not a guide to answers, but a roadmap to destruction. I turned another page in my journal, the 247th since Sawyer disappeared. The date at the top read, May 15th, 12 years after I'd torn down my first map of coordinates and realized I'd been helping the entity all along. Outside my window, spring had returned to the mountains, bringing the familiar sense of pine and warming earth. 12 years of watching. 12 years of documenting. 12 years of surviving. I'd gotten smarter about it all. My system now involved blackout curtains installed on timers that automatically closed at sunset. 3 separate locks secured my door each night, and I'd installed motion sensors around Tower 7's perimeter that would alert me to anything approaching after dark. The Forest Service maintenance crew thought I was paranoid about bears. I never corrected them. My radio sat on the desk, modified with a recording system I'd built that automatically captured any transmissions on certain frequencies, the ones where I'd heard the voices before. Next to it lay my current journal, filled with meticulous notes documenting patterns I'd observed. Dates, times, locations of light sightings, and transcribed messages from the trapped. Sawyer's voice came through less frequently now. When it did, it sounded thinner, more distant. The others, Teresa, Carl, Alicia, they faded in and out too. Sometimes clear, sometimes barely audible beneath layers of static. I'd learned to distinguish between their genuine communications and the entity's mimicry. The real voices had a quality of desperation. The fake ones were too precise, too leading. I took a sip of coffee and checked my watch. Time for the morning sweep. I picked up my binoculars and began my methodical scan of the tree line, quadrant by quadrant, looking for smoke or anything unusual. This routine had kept me alive and effective at my job. Perfect safety record. Never missed a fire. Never lost a day to illness. The higher-ups might think I was odd, but they couldn't argue with results. The radio crackled. Tower 7, this is district office. Radio check over. I set down my binoculars and picked up the handset. District office, Tower 7. Reading you clear over. Bonnie's voice came through. Morning, Russell. Just checking in. Got a new lookout starting at Tower 4 today. Name's Melissa Chen. First season. Copy that, I replied, making a note in my logbook. Tower 4 was safely outside the entity's range based on my mapping. I'll keep an eye out for her check-ins. Thought you might want to know. Maybe give her some pointers when she gets settled. I understood the unspoken message. Over the years, I'd become the unofficial mentor for new lookouts, not by choice but by necessity. I couldn't tell them the truth, but I could steer them away from danger. Will do, I said. Anything else? That's all. District office out. I replaced the handset and returned to my morning scan. Later, I'd find a way to casually mention to Melissa which areas had the best hiking trails, carefully directing her away from the places marked in red on my private maps. My system for protecting others had evolved over the years. I never told anyone the full truth. Who would believe me? Instead, I found ways to guide them. I'd mention areas with unstable terrain or unpredictable weather patterns. I'd casually drop suggestions about the best times of day for patrol, never after sunset in certain sectors. For the most part, it worked. We hadn't lost another lookout since Sawyer. After completing my morning sweep, I pulled out my calendar. Not the official Forest Service one, but my own creation. It tracked the entity's patterns of activity based on 12 years of observations. Certain times of year showed increased activity: the summer solstice, the equinoxes, and strangely, the third week of August. The new moon consistently brought more sightings than the full moon. I documented it all, creating a system to predict the most dangerous periods. Today wasn't marked as high risk. Still, I'd remain vigilant. By midday, I'd made contact with Melissa at Tower 4. She sounded young, enthusiastic, eager to learn. I gave her the standard orientation: how to distinguish smoke from dust, how to log weather patterns, how to use the radio properly. Then, casually, I mentioned the trails. If you're looking to explore, the western paths are best this time of year. Good visibility, stable terrain. I'd avoid the northeastern sector, though. Radio dead zones, tricky navigation, not worth the hassle. "Thanks for the tip," she said. "I appreciate the help." "No problem. That's what we're here for. Tower 7 out." I set down the handset, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. Another one I needed to protect without being able to tell them why. The afternoon passed quietly. I updated my weather logs, checked for smoke, and continued working on my latest project, what I called my coded manual. Retirement loomed just months away, and I'd been wrestling with what to do with all my knowledge. I couldn't just walk away and leave others vulnerable. The manual looked official enough. Forest Service safety protocols and best practices, the cover read. Inside, I disguised my warnings as standard procedures. Avoid northeastern sector patrols after 1800 hours due to navigation hazards and communication limitations. Report any unusual light phenomena immediately to district office. Do not approach for investigation without backup. Annual maintenance of Tower 12 will be conducted by specialized teams only. Standard lookout personnel are not authorized to access this location under any circumstances. Each entry contained the truth, hidden behind bureaucratic language. Would it be enough? Would anyone even read it? I didn't know, but it was the best solution I could devise. As the sun began to set, I closed my curtains and secured my locks, following the same ritual I'd performed thousands of times. The radio remained silent tonight. Sometimes I wondered if the entity knew I was listening, if it deliberately withheld communications to make me doubt myself. 3 months before retirement, I decided I needed to do more than just leave behind a manual. I needed to preserve the evidence, the full truth, for anyone brave or unfortunate enough to need it in the future. I spent weeks organizing my journals, maps, and recordings. I transferred digital files to multiple formats: USB drives, CDs, even printed hard copies. Technology changes, paper endures. I wrote a comprehensive summary of everything I'd learned about the entity, its patterns, its limitations, its hunting methods. I included every coordinate where I documented activity, every frequency where I'd received transmissions, every date of increased sightings. Then, on a clear Tuesday morning, I took a personal day and drove to the place I'd avoided for 12 years, the cave entrance. I parked my truck at a safe distance and hiked in during daylight hours, carrying a waterproof metal container with all my evidence inside. The forest felt different now. I'd learned to read its warnings. The unnatural silence, the subtle wrongness of the vegetation, the way the light filtered strangely through the trees. I recognized the signs and kept my guard up. The clearing looked much as I remembered, though the trees seemed to lean even more unnaturally outward. The cave entrance remained dark and uninviting. I didn't approach it directly. Instead, I found a hollow in a nearby rock formation, well hidden but findable if someone knew what to look for. I placed my container inside and sealed the opening with rocks and dirt that wouldn't look disturbed to casual observers. Before leaving, I hammered a small metal marker into a nearby tree. Nothing obvious, just a simple triangle that matched a symbol in my coded manual. If someone followed my instructions, they would find it. If not, the information would wait. I didn't linger. The forest felt too watchful, too aware of my presence. I made my way back to my truck and left, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. I'd done what I could. My final week at Tower 7 arrived faster than expected. I'd spent 32 years with the Forest Service, 15 at this tower alone. Despite everything, I felt a strange attachment to the place. It had been my prison and my fortress, my burden and my purpose. On my last day, I completed my morning sweep one final time. I packed my personal belongings, not much after all these years, and left my coded manual prominently on the desk for my replacement. I'd already filed it officially with the district office as well, ensuring multiple copies existed. I took one last look around the observation deck, remembering that first radio call from Sawyer 12 years ago. I wondered, not for the first time, if I could have saved him somehow, if I should have warned him more clearly about the lights, if I should have told someone the full truth despite the consequences. But those questions had no answers, and I'd made my peace with that as best I could. I locked Tower 7 behind me for the last time and walked down the metal stairs to my truck. The forest stretched out before me, beautiful and terrible in its secrets. I had survived it. I had documented it. I had done what I could to protect others from it. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the tower growing smaller in the distance. I carried the burden of knowing what lurked in the forest, but found a measure of peace in having survived to tell the tale. Even if the full story remained hidden in a metal container, waiting for someone else to find it. I took a long, careful look at the ocean through my living room window. The waves rolled in, steady and predictable, nothing like the shifting shadows of a forest at dusk. That was the point of moving here. The openness, the horizon stretching unbroken to the edge of the world. No trees to block the view. No dark places for things to hide. 5 years into retirement, I'd settled into a routine that kept me sane. Morning walks on the beach, coffee at the diner where they knew me as the quiet guy who used to work for the government. Close enough to the truth. I fixed things around town sometimes. Small carpentry jobs that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. The nightmares had faded from weekly to monthly to occasional unwelcome visitors. I turned away from the window and switched on the small television, more for background noise than anything else. The local news droned on about fishing regulations and upcoming town events. I half listened while making lunch, the mundane rhythm of chopping vegetables a comfort I never took for granted. Forest Service officials are investigating the disappearance of Ranger David Mercer from the Cascade National Forest. Mercer was last heard from during a routine radio check 3 days ago. The knife stopped mid-cut. I turned toward the television. Search teams have found no trace of the missing ranger. This marks the first disappearance in the area since a lookout vanished without explanation 17 years ago. Officials stress there is likely a practical explanation, citing the rugged terrain and possibility of wildlife encounters. My heart hammered against my ribs as the reporter continued. Standing at a trailhead I recognized all too well. Behind her stood Tower 9, not 12, which I knew remained closed and empty, but 9. A sector that had always been safe, always been normal. I sat down hard on a kitchen chair, vegetables forgotten. The forest was supposed to be contained. The entity, whatever it was, had always been focused around Tower 12 in the northeastern sector. We'd mapped it, tracked it. I'd spent 12 years documenting its boundaries. And now someone else was gone from a completely different area. I switched off the TV and sat in silence, trying to calm my breathing. Maybe it was nothing. People got lost in national forests all the time. They wandered off trail, fell into ravines, encountered bears. There were 100 normal explanations that had nothing to do with red lights or doorways or things that shouldn't exist. But I knew better. I'd spent too many years listening to the voices in the static. The doorbell rang, startling me so badly I knocked over a glass. Water pooled across the table as I stared at the door, not expecting anyone. I rarely had visitors. That was also by design. Through the peephole, I saw a face I hadn't seen in 5 years. Older, with more gray hair and deeper lines, but unmistakable. I opened the door. Bonnie. Hello, Russell. Bonnie Doyle stood on my porch, her posture still Forest Service straight despite her own retirement 3 years ago. May I come in? I stepped aside, my mind racing. Bonnie wouldn't be here unless something was very wrong. She'd been my supervisor for 20 years, but we weren't friends. We'd never socialized outside work. She lived 4 hours inland. You saw the news, she said, not a question. I nodded, closing the door behind her. Tower 9. That's nowhere near. I know. She looked around my small living room, taking in the ocean view, the deliberate absence of plants or anything resembling a forest. Nice place. Very different. That's the idea. I gestured to the couch. Sit down. Coffee? Please. I went to the kitchen, grateful for the chance to collect my thoughts. I made coffee mechanically, listening to Bonnie shift on my couch. When I returned with 2 mugs, she was holding a familiar book in her hands. My coded manual. You kept it, I said, setting her coffee on the table. I kept everything. Bonnie placed the manual carefully beside her coffee, including all the copies you filed with the district office before you left. I sat across from her, tension coiling in my stomach. And they've all been removed from the official records. The new administration went digital 3 years ago. Paper records deemed non-essential were discarded. My safety protocols weren't essential. Bonnie took a sip of coffee, her expression carefully neutral. Your safety protocols were considered the paranoid ramblings of a man who spent too much time alone in the woods. The new district supervisor found them quaint. Quaint. The word tasted bitter. And now someone else is missing. Yes. Bonnie set down her mug and looked me directly in the eyes. Russell, I owe you an apology. I waited, saying nothing. I knew more than I ever told you, about Tower 12, about the incidents. My hands tightened around my coffee mug. How much more? Enough. She looked down. Not everything, but enough to know your warnings weren't paranoia. The administration has always known something was wrong in that sector. They just found it easier to classify it as individual failures, mental breakdowns, walkouts. 6 people disappeared before Sawyer, I said. And now another one in a different sector. 7 total before this one. There was a maintenance worker in 1965 we kept out of the official records. Bonnie's voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly against her mug. I'm sorry, Russell. I should have listened when you tried to warn us. I'd spent years angry at Bonnie and the administration for ignoring my reports, for treating me like I was unstable. Now, faced with her admission, I felt hollow rather than vindicated. Why are you here, Bonnie? She reached into her bag and pulled out a file folder. Because of these. Inside were printouts of weather reports, incident logs, and ranger notes from the past 5 years, all containing small references to phenomena I recognized immediately. Equipment malfunctions, compass irregularities, radio interference. But the locations were wrong. The patterns had shifted, spreading outward from the northeastern sector like ripples in a pond. It's moving, I said quietly, or growing. The current staff doesn't see the pattern. They don't know what to look for. Bonnie closed the folder, but I did. After you left, I started paying attention to the things you'd documented. Not because I fully believed, but because you weren't sure I was wrong." She nodded. "The new ranger, Mercer. He reported unusual lights the day before he disappeared. The report was logged, but dismissed. He was told it was probably headlamps from off-trail hikers, just like Sawyer, just like all of them." "Why didn't you warn him?" I asked, anger finally surfacing. "I tried. I called his supervisor. I was told, quite firmly, that retired personnel shouldn't interfere with current operations." Bonnie's jaw tightened. By the time I decided to go there myself, he was already gone. I stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the safe, open ocean. For 5 years, I'd been free of the forest and its horrors. I'd built something resembling a normal life. The nightmares had almost stopped. "What do you want from me, Bonnie?" "I want you to help me warn them. The new generation. They have no idea what they're dealing with." I laughed without humor. They didn't listen to me when I worked there. Why would they listen now? Because this time there are 2 of us, and because I have access they don't know about. She stood up. "Russell, I know you left all your research hidden somewhere in that forest. You're too thorough not to have kept records beyond what you filed officially." I said nothing, but my silence was confirmation enough. "We need that evidence. We need to show them this isn't new, that there's a pattern going back decades. We need to make them understand before more people disappear." I turned back to her. "And if they still don't listen? If they decide we're just 2 crazy old forest rangers?" "Then at least we tried." Bonnie's expression softened slightly. "You spent 12 years documenting that thing, Russell. You knew someday someone would need to know what you learned." She was right. I'd hidden my complete records for exactly this reason. Because someday, the entity would do something that couldn't be ignored or explained away. I just hadn't expected it to happen in my lifetime. I'd thought it would be someone else's fight. "I need to think about it," I said finally. I can't just..." A crackling sound from the bedroom interrupted me. A sound I hadn't heard in 5 years but recognized instantly. Radio static. Bonnie heard it too, her head turning toward the hallway. "Is that..." "Impossible," I whispered, already moving toward the bedroom. My old Forest Service radio sat on the top shelf of my closet, disconnected and unpowered, kept only as a reminder. I'd never thrown it away, but I'd never turned it on either. I couldn't bear to listen for voices that might still be trapped. Yet now it crackled with static, growing louder as we entered the bedroom. Bonnie stayed in the doorway while I approached the closet slowly, my heart pounding. The static cleared suddenly, replaced by a voice I hadn't heard in 17 years except in nightmares. Clear as if he were standing beside me, without the distortion that had always accompanied the transmissions before. "It's spreading, Russell. The doorways are opening in new places. You need to tell them what's coming." Sawyer's voice. Not fragmented or distant, but clear and urgent. The radio went silent. I stood frozen, staring at the closet shelf. "That was him, wasn't it?" Bonnie asked quietly. "The lookout who disappeared from Tower 12. I nodded, unable to speak. "How is that possible? The radio isn't even connected to anything." "The same way all of this is possible." I reached up and took down the radio, confirming what I already knew. No power source, no batteries, completely disconnected. The rules we understand don't apply to whatever this thing is. Bonnie's face had gone pale. What did he mean about doorways opening in new places? "It means we're out of time." I set the radio down and turned to face her. "The entity is expanding its territory. What was contained to the northeastern sector for decades is spreading. And based on your reports, it's been happening gradually for years." I walked past her into the living room and stared at the ocean one last time. The peaceful retirement I'd built was over. Maybe it had always been temporary, a pause before the final confrontation I'd been avoiding. I need maps, I said, already mentally cataloging what I would need. Current ones, and access to the Forest Service intranet to see all incident reports from the last 5 years. I can get those, Bonnie said, following me. What else? My journals. I kept copies of everything, and equipment, compass, GPS, radios. I turned to face her. But you should know what you're getting into, Bonnie. This thing, it remembers. It knows me. Going back puts a target on my back. Our backs, she corrected. I'm coming with you. I wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped me. Fine, but we do this my way. We follow the protocols I developed. No shortcuts, no heroics. Agreed. She picked up my coded manual from the coffee table. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. I need tonight to prepare. After Bonnie left with a list of supplies to gather, I stood in my living room looking at the life I was about to abandon. The safe, predictable routine. The ocean view with nowhere to hide. I started packing methodically. Clothes, first aid kit, flashlights with extra batteries, the backup journals I'd kept in a lockbox under my bed. My hands moved automatically while my mind raced through everything I knew about the entity. Everything I'd learned in those 12 years of observation. The forest had always been my responsibility. From my first day as a lookout to my last, I'd taken that duty seriously. Now I understood it had never really ended. Some duties can't be retired from, no matter how far you run. I loaded my truck as the sun set, securing maps and equipment in the back. Tomorrow, I would drive back into the mountains I'd avoided for 5 years, back to the forest where nightmares came to life. I knew the danger. I knew the entity remembered me and would be waiting. But I also knew I was the only one who might save others from Sawyer's fate. The only one who understood what we were facing. The forest was calling me back for one final confrontation, and this time, I was going prepared to fight.